Welcome to the Miller Report, Real Clear Journalism. I'm Maggie Miller. Today we're going to have a discussion about politicians' finances, and this is going to start based off of a recent Real Clear investigation done by Paul Sperry, titled The Remarkable Rags to Riches Story of Stacey Abrams. This new investigative report is raising questions about the dramatic financial rise of Stacey Abrams, the Georgia Democrat who gained national attention after her runs for governor. According to Real Clear Investigations, Abrams' net worth jumped from under $109,000 in 2018 to more than $3.2 million by 2022, despite never holding elected office or working in the private sector. At the center of that growth is Rewiring America, a green energy nonprofit that received $1.9 billion in federal funds from the Biden EPA. Abrams helped the group secure the grant and later joined as a senior counsel. That grant is now under investigation by Congress and the Trump administration. Meanwhile, Georgia lawmakers have launched a separate ethics probe into another nonprofit that Abrams founded, the New Georgia Project, accusing it of failing to report millions in donations tied to her 2018 campaign. The report also highlighted Abrams' past personal financial troubles, including $230,000 in unpaid debts and IRS liens, and dozens of amendments to fix errors in her financial disclosures. While she's never been charged with a crime, the report paints a picture of blurred lines between public service and personal gain, raising broader questions about how political influence can be leveraged behind the scenes. I'm joined now by the lead investigator on this story, Paul Sperry. Paul, thank you so much for being here.
Glad to be with you.
So this isn't the first time that we've seen politicians see significant financial gains, even outside of the scope of what you'd accept for those in the government sector. Do you believe that Stacey Abrams' financial trajectory is an outlier, or is this part of a broader trend in American politics?
She is a bit of an outlier, but yes, it is a trend. And by the way, she's the first in a series that we're doing, investigating a lot of public servants who have become fabulously and mysteriously wealthy while serving on the taxpayer dime. It's kind of a rogues gallery, if you will, that we're going to be focusing on. But Stacey Abrams, she, public service has been, very, very good to Stacey Abrams and, very lucrative. She has gone in just a few short years while losing campaigns for governor. She went from crushing debt to over $3 million in net worth, including a 4,000 square foot mansion with a pool and a wine cellar. And so, her story is a really remarkable rags to riches story. And we wanted to drill down a little bit more in exactly how it was that she was able to amass such a small fortune in such a small amount of time while working primarily in the nonprofit sector. So we pulled about a dozen years of her financial disclosures and ran a comb through all the financial data. And what we discovered was that she, in almost every instance, in every venture that she undertook, she really leveraged the public sector in enriching herself, and not so much as she is portrayed in her books that, I was this great private businesswoman who took advantage of the capitalist system and, was a great entrepreneur. I took advantage of the free market. That really wasn't the case. The record shows that really was not the case.
It really seems like there's this gray area, so to speak, where it's like, it's not illegal, but is it right?
Right, exactly. Well, in her case, in this process, she did cut a number of ethical corners. And, she's the subject of, and some of the entities that she has created are the subject of ongoing investigations. But for instance, she was using campaign resources staff to promote and sell her books. And so that made a lot of money for her using public resources. She was paying herself millions from her nonprofits that she started. And this was for part-time work. She pocketed hundreds of thousands in questionable reimbursements from the government and from her campaign accounts. And she also was tapping into a number of government slush funds that were created by the Obama administration, the Biden administration. And she was landing huge contracts and grant money from this legislation. including the controversial $2 billion EPA mega grant that's been in the news recently.
Over $1 million for part-time work is something that I cannot wrap my head around, even in the slightest. So,
and her sister, and she spreads the wealth around. Her sister is working for one of her nonprofits and pulling in almost $200,000 a year.
Well, I mean, it'll be interesting to see what, if anything, comes of this. Obviously, you did mention in your reporting that in her case, there have been no criminal charges to this point. But how do we measure accountability with something like this in the public eye?
I mean, folks need to hold such officials accountable. And, this is all relevant because she has presidential ambitions. She's not satisfied to end up in the governor's mansion in Atlanta. She wants to end up in the White House. And so a lot of these, she's the subject, or nonprofits, at least two, are the subject of multiple investigations right now. And we're talking about both the state of Georgia, state Senate has just opened an investigation. We've gotten multiple investigations at the federal level from Inspector General, EPA, IRS, looking at tax exempt status for these groups she started. Justice Department is looking into her and her nonprofits, many of which have sent millions of dollars, and they didn't report this to the IRS, to her campaigns to help fund her campaigns. And they're looking at whether or not dark money was funneled through these nonprofits to her campaigns.
And so I'm sure this isn't the only case. I know this is a big case, but how common is it for political figures to profit, maybe not to this extent, but from nonprofits or PACs that they've helped create or fund?
She's kind of exceptional in that she has created this maze. I mean, it is unreal. We found just, in our investigation, over 24 LLCs and nonprofits and other entities that commingle funds. They pass money back and forth, and with little accountability, because a lot of this money is hard to track because it's covered up through shell companies, and so she's been able to hide a lot of this stuff, and so more light definitely needs to be shown upon it. We've actually have in the works another follow-up, something we discovered else in our investigation. So stay tuned. We will be following up on another story too on Stacey Abrams herself, and then going on in the series to other politicians, elected officials.
You're leaving me wondering, because just something that I know I've seen all over social media is people like the Nancy Pelosi of it all, where people are like, she does all this like with her money. Sorry, I got tongue tied right there. But with her money, she makes these decisions that you're like, it feels like there's some insider knowledge going on there. So it makes me wonder if that's someone who we also need to keep an eye on.
Yeah, with her equities portfolio. Pelosi's tough because she's married to a guy who's a multimillionaire. So, Stacey Abrams is a little bit different. She's single. Some of these others can say, well, that was, I'm sharing a lot of wealth, or a lot of the wealth came from, my husband or my spouse. So she's a little bit tougher to look at, kind of separate out the finances.
So what would you say were the biggest takeaways did you want people to take away from this investigative report that you did?
Well, on the $2 billion grant, we actually came away with a little scoop on the Rewiring America grant that was awarded by the Biden EPA. Okay, so it turns out, well, back up a little bit. The Washington Post and a lot of legacy media have tried to downplay Stacey Abrams' role in the grant and the grant making process and everything. We found that her partner at Rewiring America actually is on record. He gave this podcast, and it hasn't been reported on. A very obscure podcast. This was last July, where he said, "Listen, Stacey Abrams and I, we actually we put together the coalition that applied for that massive grant." And he was bragging about it, we got it, $2 billion. And so Stacey Abrams was a key player in the grant writing process for that massive mega grant of $2 billion. And then we found out that her partner, and I can actually, let me back up a little. So her partner is Matusiak at Rewiring, he said in the podcast, the other thing that we did that Stacey and I have been working on over the last year and change is that we put together a coalition to apply for something called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund. This is one of the slush funds that was created, the green funds out of the Inflation Reduction Act under Biden. And we were selected for $2 billion to really create a way forward for the low and moderate income households and communities so that every kitchen table is able to participate. What they're trying to do is electrify every appliance in low income communities, get rid of natural gas, which, they say, we want to decarbonize the environment. And so beyond that, though, this same guy, Matusiak, was involved in writing the legislation that created that slush fund. And so then they come back later and apply for the money in that slush fund. They wrote the legislation, then wrote the grant that got the money out of that legislation. So a bit of an inside job there is what we discovered. And that's actually something that's being investigated. We understand from our reporting that they're looking at whether or not that grant review process at the EPA under Biden was competitive. Mm-hmm. And whether or not, it was fair, because they seem to have the inside track, Stacey Abrams and this guy Matusiak at Rewiring America. And that's how they were able to, this coalition they formed was able to get that money. So they're looking at whether or not, this was a fraudulent process.
Yeah, I mean, I've spoken recently with Real Clear Investigations, James Varney, who's been looking into the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Act. And I mean, one of the things that we spoke about was how obviously Democratic states and Democratic people are more likely to, go after these grants, but it did seem like it was, going towards specific people. And this might be just one of those cases.
Yeah. And, we also found a number of instances where the rewiring folks were going into the White House being hosted by Biden, and being, the discussion in these meetings, these summits, were like, yeah, you guys are going to put together this coalition. So it wasn't a competitive bidding process, it seems like, on the surface. So that's something that could be corrupt and needs to be looked into. It remains to be seen whether that was the case, but these investigations are going forward. The money right now has been frozen, and the coalition that Stacey Abrams and this guy Matusiak started is suing to try and get the money unfrozen. And they might be able to find a Democrat judge who will do that, and then they're off the races. The money will start flowing again.
Well, your great reporting at least is bringing this to people's eyes, letting them see everything that's going on. They can make decisions. Hopefully there'll be some movement within the government as well. Is there anything you'd like to add as we wrap things up?
No, other than just to inform your viewers that this is going to be an ongoing series for Real Clear Investigations. We're going to, like I said, we're going to be looking at more than just Stacey Abrams, officials who have had this remarkable growth in wealth while they've been working in either public office or for nonprofits. How did they amass all this money? Was it on the up and up? Maybe it was their spouses in some cases. Maybe it was just they gave a lot of speeches or they wrote a lot of books. But it's unusual, and taxpayers are curious. How did these people? We can't make all this money in the private sector. We worked our whole life, and yet these guys go in the public sector and they become fabulously wealthy. How is this possible? So we're going to be looking at kind of a series of rogues gallery, if you will, of these public servants and public officials going forward.
Well, I look forward to hopefully speaking with you again in the future when you uncover someone else's financial background.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for joining me. That was it for the Miller Report, Real Clear Journalism. We'll see you next time.